right, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us today during the end of the world. We know your time is really valuable, so we're pleased to have you with us for this first edition of Instabug Live. I'm April Mascara. I lead content at Instabug, and today we're chatting with Justen Stepka.
Everybody.
One of our new investors from our recent Series A fundraising round. He's now an investor heading up Enterprise Fund along with his partner, Ben Metzger, who he was with at Atlassian. At Atlassian, Justen grew Bitbucket and Sourcetree to multi-million user bases. He also led product at Docker, starting when it was just a 15-person team and growing it to a multi-billion-dollar company. So Justen, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, glad to be here.
All right, I guess let's start at the beginning with the company that you founded, but actually you started your career at JWT, an international ad agency. So what prompted you to start Authentisoft, which is a security startup?
Yeah, that was a long time ago. I ended up getting a job, my first real programming job at J. Walter Thompson, sort of a summer internship thing. And it turned out to be a fantastic place to work. I spent maybe 4 or 5 years there, and I came up with this idea to start this product. Originally, it was going to be an open source product that did single sign-on and security management, kind of like Okta does. But at the time, there was nothing available on the market that was less than $1 million. And so I was going through this website called SourceForge at the time, which is where everybody kept all their open source code prior to GitHub. And I was like, what is something that doesn't exist here? And then at J. Walter Thompson, we'd be brought in to build, these huge websites for companies like Ford, who were trying to figure out how to put their vehicle sales online. This would have been 2001, 2002. And we kept having to build login. And I just remember, like, every time we'd build login, we would throw away all of the code and then we would start over from scratch. We ended up charging these clients. We had this joke that it cost them $1 million to be able to log into the website. And then we would start actually building the website. And so I was like, this is stupid. And so I didn't see anything on SourceForge that was working with Java, which was sort of the language of choice at the time. And so I started building it. And as I started building it, before I released it to be open source, I started to realize that it might have some commercial application. And that's when I decided to do my own business.
Nice. So you went off on your own, and you did that for a couple of years. How did you end up selling Authentisoft to Atlassian? Tell us what that was, how that came about, and what that was like. What was your decision-making process?
Yeah, happy to. So some of you might be familiar with IRC, or Internet Relay Chat. And at the time, this was a popular way for people to stay in touch. It's just before Slack rooms and sort of the more Stack Overflow and things like this. And so if you had problem programming, you would go on IRC and you'd seek out the Java channel or the PHP channel or whatever. And so I hung out in the Java channel quite a bit, and so did the CEOs of Atlassian. And we were all working on a variety of open source projects related to things that we were making. And what ended up happening was as the product got to a point where it was mature enough in order for me to release it and start charging money, they basically said, hey, we've got Jira, we've got Confluence, we're going to build more products, but we need a way to integrate all of our users for our customers so that when they go to add one user in Jira, that they don't have to add a user another time in Confluence. And at the time, they were starting to recognize that Active Directory or LDAP was going to be very important to their enterprise customer base, which is where they were going to generate most of their revenue from. And I had built out something that connected their security services to Jira and Confluence. And so they basically said, look, why don't you join? And they gave me the option of moving to Sydney or San Francisco. For me, growing up in sort of the rural middle of America, I mean, that was like hitting a grand slam. And so, I went to Las Vegas, and I was speaking at a conference on remote API functions, and it was SOAP is what it was, and I met them in a bar, and we hammered out the deal, and I think before they even got to the end of the first sentence, I was like, I'll take it. And so I didn't do a very good job negotiating. For me, what I just saw was, I wanted to be able to travel internationally, which almost nobody from where I came from did that. It was so rare for somebody to start a software business in sort of the area of the world that I was in. And so for me, we worked out a deal where it was a cash deal, and then I got royalties that started a couple months after I got to Sydney. And so that gave me time to rebrand the product, get it integrated into their website. And then, for the next couple of years, I got royalties, and it was able to tap into, at that time, it was probably around 5,000 or 10,000 customers Atlassian had at the time. To put that in perspective, they have probably 175,000 customers now. And so, it was a win-win all around. Honestly, that was probably the most significant life-changing event in my 40 years on Earth.
Yeah, that sounds like a huge milestone. Can you tell us about the early years when you first joined Atlassian? I know you were there for about 8, but at the beginning, like you said, the user was small. So tell us how the team functioned. What was it like when you first joined, and what was your role? And then sort of the first milestones that you hit at Atlassian.
Yeah, it was the perfect place for me. I was 26. Mike and Scott are the same age as me, so they're 26. These are the CEOs of Atlassian. Everybody else was 26. We were all sort of at the same spot at the same moment in life. We all had the same hobbies. We played a lot of board games. We played a lot of poker. We would play poker for until we couldn't stay awake anymore. Once a month, we would do that. On Fridays, we would have a game. It was $5 buy-in, and every couple minutes, the antes would go up, and then one person would walk away with all of the money, and then you'd go get lunch. You'd get lunch before. There was different board games, and they were all strategy games. The way that the teams worked then were, Atlassian was, when I got there, was starting to acquire companies, and Atlassian didn't have the sort of a discipline called product management. And so what they did was they made the CEO of the company that they acquired the lead engineer on the project that whatever you were working on. So in my case, the product, Autonomous Steps product, became Crowd. Bamboo was a different one, and then there was Fisheye and Crucible, and the guy that ran that company ran all 3 of those products. And Atlassian had this very frugal mentality where the minimal number of engineers that you sort of needed, the sort of 1 or 2 pizza box kind of approach, and that really forced you to think about what you were going to have to make trade-offs in terms of building the product. You also got to, one thing that I think really surprises people is Atlassian took no investment. And so the company was being run off of the profits that were being generated by the product. And so, which was part of the contract structure that I had on my deal. And so, every Monday I would go up to the finance department and I would ask them to print out all of the invoices for everything that was sold. And I had this big glass office with the other engineers. And I basically started putting the invoices on the glass window in my office, and the goal was to cover the entire office so that you couldn't see into the office anymore. And I told the team, like, when we got to that point, we were just going to go to the nicest restaurant that we could find in town. And Sydney's a pretty classy place. And when we got there, I mean, we had a great dinner. That we moved offices all the time because the company was expanding so fast. You figure out how to hire people. Atlassian started opening a San Francisco office, so then you're starting to get to do international travel all the time. And that was pretty amazing. Like, I just, it seemed like sort of a James Bond scenario to me, because, like, you only saw those things in the movie where people get to, like, go fly internationally every month or every other month to another city in order to meet with customers, or, and we're 26, 27 years old. That was pretty rare, I think, for somebody that's that age.
For sure. So it sounds like, it was going pretty fast and you had to adjust pretty quickly, move to different offices. Can you tell us about some of the challenges that you faced? And I don't know, now that you've had more experience, what would you do differently in that we're growing so quickly and moving so fast?
Well, hiring was definitely a challenge for Atlassian, just because of its geographic location. It also turned out to be a huge advantage as well, and I'll go over that. So Atlassian is in Sydney, and I want to say up until the year, Atlassian started in 2001, up until 2010, all of the hiring was done in Sydney. Now, Sydney is a very small city or region or country, even compared to, let's say, the size of the United States, and especially Silicon Valley, and having such a high concentration of specific type of workers. And so recruiting was a challenge, but at the same time, what Atlassian was willing to do was sponsor visas for anybody to come down there. And so one of the ways that we approached being competitive in the marketplace for hiring engineers was basically, hey, look, you and your partner can get a visa down here. And again, this was the focus on hiring a lot of people in their late 20s and early 30s. As a cohort is go on this around the world adventure, and we're going to help fund it. And that also became an advantage for us in the sense that our customers were global, and then this gave us people that understood how to be ambassadors out into the communities where the customers were buying. And so if we ended up going to a conference, we ended up having somebody that could speak the local language, which is a huge advantage, because people want to buy from somebody that has the same language skills from them. Let's say if you go to France or if you go to Brazil or something like that. In terms of what we would do different, I think going back to starving the products a little bit, I think we potentially could have increased the size of the engineering teams a little bit. I think that would have allowed us to get more done quickly. But again, it's hard for me to know, because I wasn't really in charge of the finances of anything outside of my own product, whether or not that would have been possible without taking on additional debt in order to run the company, which is always risky. I mean, if you don't have to do it, don't do it.
What about within your specific product area? So Bitbucket specifically, as the product grew, as the company grew, what kind of product specific challenges did you face?
Yeah, so I ended up not wanting to work on the product that I'd sold to Atlassian anymore, especially once the royalties ran out. I felt like I had sort of taken that thing end to end, and I wanted to see my kid grow up on its own a little bit. So Atlassian ended up acquiring Bitbucket. And if you remember back, I was using SourceForge trying to figure out how to market my own product, and I successfully integrated Crowd or Fenisoft into Atlassian. And when you sell it, like, they're very complicated things that you got to do. You got to integrate it into the building system. You got to train the support team. You've got to update the website. Like there's so many things that go into building software outside of just actually writing the code. You got to market it. You know, you got to do webinars. You got to go to conferences. You got to do all of these things that you don't think about when you start writing the code. Because, you know, I started as an engineer. And, you know, the more and more the product grows, the further and further you get away from the actual engineering, which is what I think a lot of people don't recognize when they build products. And, you know, and that's fine. If you want to work on the engineering over a long period of time, you know, you're going to have to hire or trust or partner with somebody, maybe it's a co-founder or whatever it is, in order to do the operational components of actually building a successful software product. And so, Jesper had sold Bitbucket to Atlassian, but he wasn't really interested in those things. And so he wanted to be the architect, and he wanted to do code, and like he just couldn't be concerned with negotiating AWS bills or, you know, all these things that go into scaling a product like Bitbucket. Being on call 24 hours a day, figuring out call hour rotations, just all of these, it's just these nuanced sort of operational things. And so making sure backups work. I mean, just so many things. So Scott and Mike said to me, they said, look, you integrated Authentisoft. We need you to do that for Bitbucket. And they're like, oh, by the way, did you see GitHub? Like GitHub is getting really big, really fast. And we're concerned that they are going to make an issue tracker to compete with Jira. And Jira is the flagship product at Atlassian, and you know, it generates, I don't know, over 50, maybe 60% of the revenue. You know, it's paying for those poker sessions, it's paying for the beer nights, it's paying for the dinners. I mean, it's paying for everything. And they're like, you got to figure out how to protect our flank. And so, you know, one of the challenges we really faced was figuring out what was going to be a business strategy to compete with GitHub. And because, you know, if you go back 10 years, every single project on the internet is migrating off of SourceForge or their own custom CVS or Subversion server, and they're putting it on GitHub for exposure. And then Metcalfe's law is just expanding so fast, where the size of the network influences the overall value of the network, which attracts more people, and it's just growing so fast. And so what we did was we had to identify a strategy that was going to be different than GitHub. And what we settled on was this: GitHub was mostly appealing to individuals and open source projects. And what we decided that we were going to do was we were going to focus on 10-person teams or smaller. And the reason that we went with 10-person teams was, you know, if you work at a big company now, you know, let's say a bank or whatever, of course you have Git. But, you know, when Git was overtaking Subversion at the time, excuse me, you know, it wasn't going to be a big engineering department at a bank that was going to switch to Git. It was going to be a small startup team, or it was going to be some like one-off team inside of a small or mid-sized company. There was going to be a handful of engineers that wanted to explore future technologies and start preparing for the future. And so we focused on that persona as a customer, and we started really focusing on security related features. And then we started building in integrations with the tools that they were paying with, specifically Jira, so that, you know, you could see things like when you look at your source code, you could click on the commit message and be taken directly to the bug or the feature request that was in a different system. And, you know, building those features early really allowed us to differentiate in a way that GitHub sort of ignored for a long time.
How did you come to that? How did you narrow in on that cohort or that? Did you research, like, how did you get to that point where you knew that this is the segment that you're going to go after, rather than try to do it all or other segments?
Yeah, you know, when they asked me to run Bitbucket, I remember I was like, well, but what are we going to do with it? And they're like, I don't know, it's a bag of parts, figure it out. And it's what my boss said to me. And I was like, oh, okay, it's a bag of parts. And I was like, all right, well, who's going to use this? And I was like, well, first off, we're going to dog food it. And the things that we needed in order to use Bitbucket as a business didn't exist. And our again, going back to GitHub was an open source driven feature roadmap. And I couldn't use the product internally at Atlassian. Like I couldn't convince engineering teams to switch off of Subversion and use Bitbucket. And I started asking myself, well, why won't they, right? Like, and going back to the bank example, the largest teams at Atlassian switched to Git last, and that would have been the Jira team. But these sort of like small pocket teams at Atlassian, or the 20% time people were willing to use it. And I just started asking myself, like, what is it they need in order to use this commercially at work? And then there was an internal like competition. The IT team wanted to set up their own Git server, and they wanted to protect it with access features that weren't available on Bitbucket. And I just said to them, I was like, listen, like I will build whatever you need right away. I can't have an internal team competing with a commercial product that we're making using open source product. This is ridiculous. And so me and the engineering leader and some of the other people that were sort of senior guiders at the company, we all mapped out all of the things that we could potentially build. And then, Atlassian is very good at doing collaboration sessions internally. And we built a roadmap that was sort of a bunch of different swim lanes. It was like infrastructure, it was individual developers, it was commercial applications, and then it was Jira integration. And if I did anything over again, I would probably build the Jira integration faster. Because then it provides an upstream into what was our biggest competitive lever commercially against GitHub. And even if you like look at the customers that adopt GitHub now, they're still using Jira. And so I would have really pressed on the gas pedal for Jira more if I could
have. So in this time, the product is growing, company scaling. What about you personally? Are you managing more people managers? Are you still like, deep in the weeds? What about your own role?
Yeah, well, Atlassian ended up acquiring Sourcetree, and then that ended up becoming quite big as well. And then we started to realize that the Jira integration was quite big in terms of our competitive advantage. So I was managing that product as well. And so, I've got 3 products that I'm managing. The number of interactions, the sub number of engineering teams, the number of engineering teams was across 3 continents. And so, I would, thankfully, Sydney comes on very late in the day in San Francisco. Because we didn't start till 10, which meant engineering didn't start till 11 a.m. And then because they get the most overlap with Sydney at the end of the day. And so, but late at night, the engineering team in Europe, like I'd stay up until 11 o'clock, midnight, twice a week, going over with the engineering teams then in order to make sure that we're getting the Jira integration built well. And then at the same time, you're flying between all 3 of these places all the time. I didn't have a girlfriend at the time. I can't imagine that she really would have put up with it, to be honest. But and then the other thing that happened was we started scaling the company up really fast in terms of hiring. So, I would spend probably at least 3 hours a day doing interviews. And I think that's the one, going back to like, a lot of the things that people don't think about when they think about building a company is if you want to have a successful company, you have to hire people. And if you have to hire people, that means you have to spend time interviewing people. And so, for sure too, as much as 4 hours a day interviewing. So I'd say that was my least favorite thing. And that went on for about 2 years.
Wow. Yeah, so it sounds like you developed a lot personally in that time as well.
Mm-hmm. And work, by the way, they're getting coaches for senior leaders and stuff too as well, which was fantastic. And
So
so, and that stuff matters quite a bit. And I know it seems sort of like cheesy when you get asked to do it, but like, and I thought it was cheesy at first, but like as I've matured in my career, I realize how important that stuff is now. And I'm not talking about the like, hey, let's talk about what is sexual harassment training. I'm talking about like, how do you effectively communicate in a meeting? How do you effectively like write concise emails when you are trying to scale globally? Stuff like that.
any tactical tips that you want to share from those sessions?
I would say answer the question that somebody asked you in the shortest possible number of words if you can. And so like one mistake I saw a lot was is if someone asks you a yes or no question, so many people will reply with a sentence rather than just saying yes or no. And then if the person wants details on why you're yes or no, then give them the details on yes or no. And I watch this in meetings all the time. And if you take an effective communication class, they'll that's the first one that they're going to hit you with every time.
That's good advice. Thanks for sharing. Okay, so, and then at some point you moved to Docker. And when you started there, it was also when it was just a small team. So why did you make that leap from Atlassian? And what was it about Docker that you believed in that you made that change?
Yeah. Well, but for starters, I'd been at Atlassian a long time, and if I'm honest with myself, I wanted to do 3 successful companies. I wanted to be like, I wanted to hit a grand slam. I wanted to know that like I could serially pick these things and be successful at them. And so it was kind of ego driven a little bit, but at the same time, recognized Docker very, very early. And the reason we recognized it was Atlassian had done an investment in a web IDE company. And that was trying to replicate development environments in an IDE on the web. And it wasn't working out so well. It was more just like an online editor that integrated with the version control system. And in order for it to be more successful, it would have needed virtual machines or containers, which were sort of coming to fruition at that time. And I looked at these containers and I was like, this is exactly what's missing, right? Like, and it's not a proprietary technology that VMware owns. It's this neutral company, and it is going to have viral adoption because it's not going to be a license to some, single choke point. And I was like, if you could get that into the cloud providers and you could more easily move dev environments and have stabler deployments, I was like, this is going to be huge. And so one of the executives, Docker was looking for sort of like a advisement council. And, he reached out on LinkedIn and we sort of took it from there. I was looking for a new adventure and I wanted to prove to myself that I could go 3 for 3. And so I took that leap of faith and went to Docker. And, it was about 15 people when I started, and, hardly anybody even knew what it was. I remember Atlassian was like, what is this little company that you're going to know? They're like, you're running a massive product at Atlassian. They're like, what are you doing? And Atlassian has gotten, I don't know, 10, 15 times as big since then. And, maybe that wasn't the right financial choice, but, I learned just as much going to Docker as I did in the previous 8 years at Atlassian.
So because you had the first 2 under your belt, what did you do differently at Docker when you were scaling, like to be able to go? I'm assuming that the things you've learned in the last couple of places you were able to implement right away in order to scale faster. So what are those things that you do differently at Docker?
Yeah, well, some of the things that we knew we were going to need right away at Docker was a partnership and a training program. And again, this comes back to non-engineering stuff. And I imagine most of the people that are on this call are mostly engineers. But, if your product becomes very successful, then, in order to scale it and get it into companies, you have to provide a way in order for those companies to successfully adopt your product. which is different than just writing the code. Like obviously the code has to work and it has to be bug free and things like that. And you have to have a good roadmap and good discipline and things like that. But because of how quickly this open source project was being adopted, we needed, because we couldn't hire fast enough in order to get partner companies to implement the technology and deploy it on site. So we had to develop a partner program, we had to develop a training program, we had to like build a certification program. And you know, these things took a long time at Atlassian, and they were built very organically. You know, Atlassian didn't really focus on the plugin aspect of the business until probably the second half of its life. Whereas at Docker, we focused on those things, you know, at probably the end of the first year of the company.
And then after, so how long did you spend at Docker, and when you made the shift away from Docker, what was it like when you left it?
Yeah, so I spent 4 years at Docker. You know, I worked on a lot of things there. I worked on training, certification, Docker Hub, the desktop client. I ran the analytics team. There was a lot of, analytics was another thing that we implemented right away. And so you know, we were just starting to implement analytics at Atlassian, and that when I got to Docker, I said to the executive team, it was like, we got to have analytics right away, right now, integrated into the product, and the infrastructure for this stuff didn't exist. It's come so far in 5 years with tools like Segment and you know, sort of these streaming databases. Like this stuff was all brand new in 2014. And you know, we'd custom rolled a solution at Atlassian, but we were able to start buying some off-the-shelf stuff at Docker. We were one of the first customers for Looker, which was a huge acquisition that was done by Google. You know, whereas at Atlassian, we had built a custom data rendering system. I can't imagine. Oh, dude, there must have been 5-10 people that worked on that. I mean, that's just buy it off the shelf. And so when I decided to leave, you know, I've been doing software for about 15 years and had a pretty good run. For me, I just decided that I wanted a break for a little while. And, you know, to be honest, I got a little burnt out, you know, and it wasn't as much fun as it was, let's say 10 years ago. You know, the travel, the hard work, you know, that stuff, you know, like you got to recharge. And so I told myself I was going to take a year off and I was going to travel. And I did. I went to Europe quite a few times. I went to Australia quite a few times, you know, and visited my grandma, went and visited my parents a lot, rented a boat for the summer twice. And, you know, I'm coming back to San Francisco, which is where my main residence is. And, you know, Ben, my business partner, he's quit. He stayed at Atlassian, I want to say 15 years, but he resigned the same month that I resigned from Docker. And we were catching up in San Francisco when I was there for a couple of weeks. And he's just like, yeah, I'm going to start doing some investing. And I mean, he's a funny guy. He's like Oprah, if you have seen the meme. He's like, you get 25 grand and you get 25 grand and you get 25 grand. He's just giving everybody 25 grand for their business. And I'm like, Ben, this is crazy, man. You're going to run out of money. And he's like, yeah, but they're all such interesting opportunities. And like, yes, they are all interesting, but they're all not going to make money. And, you know, he's in sales and marketing. He was, you know, the first exec in charge of sales at Atlassian. And I, you know, I did product and engineering. So he's always chipper and happy, and I'm always sort of conservative and grumpy, you know, if you sort of play the stereotypes. And he's just like, why don't we get together and we do this together? And I was like, no, I'm not. I told you I'm not working. But I was getting bored. And Docker kept calling, and they're like, come on back. And you know, Atlassian was like, you know, they gave me a pretty good opportunity to come back there and run a big chunk of that company. And I was just like, no. And then Ben would just sit there, you know, and he was just like on repeat, like every 60 days. He would like know how long to wait and how long to call me. And then he was like, look, I'm gonna get an office, and it's gonna be down on the Embarcadero in San Francisco. And he's like, you should get it with me. And he's like, you should do this with me. And so our goal is to find 4 enterprise software companies. We're very focused only on enterprise software companies. We've done 2 investments. One is in a company called Sajari, which is AI, machine learning, search. And you know, quite a few Atlassians now work there, and we got about 10 other Atlassians to invest in that company. So all told, there's about 12, you know, former Atlassians sort of rallying around this artificial intelligence search company. And then we did a small bit of the Series A into Instabug. So we've got two done this year. We're halfway through the year, and so we got to find 2 more this year.
Nice. So other than being an enterprise company, what do you look for in the companies that you're considering investing in?
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely, you know, as you said, they're software development technology firms, which really sort of narrows it down very quickly. I think the thing that we look for, and we've turned down quite a few, is we're looking for, one, people that we can connect with, people that we can tap in our Atlassian network. And so it has to be something that, you know, is a domain expertise to us. And so, you know, there's, you know, it could be cloud software, it could be dev tools, it could be collaboration tools for the enterprise. And what we want to do is find companies that we think are going to be needed by tens, if not hundreds of thousands of customers, and match the persona of what the Atlassian network would be able to contribute. And so part of what we want to be able to do is bring in the Atlassian alumni, have them invest, or potentially, you know, have some of these people go work at these companies. And then what we want to do is sort of offer a multiplier effect towards helping these people be successful, whether that's hooking them up with former Atlassian partners who understand how to successfully sell software in, let's say, the UK or Northern Europe, or, you know, maybe somebody in Japan that, you know, speaks Japanese and you want to go attack the 2nd largest IT market globally.
So on the flip side of that, what are some red flags that you just immediately like, nope, we're not going to go there with this company?
Yeah, you know, I'm kind of famous for Ben will talk to you for an hour. You know, sort of going back to that that coaching class that I took. If you can't effectively communicate your idea in 5 minutes, it's going to be hard for us to work together, because I'm going to struggle to be able to collaborate with you. And so clear, concise ability to communicate, especially when you're asking for money. Like if you can't clearly articulate your ideas, then I'm not going to be comfortable giving you my money. And the way that Ben and I's fund works is Ben and I put in about a quarter to half of the money, and then we pool together the other Atlassians. And so I need to feel confident in you in order to go ask my friends to put their money into your company as well. And so that just starts right away with communication. And then, you know, we'll look at things like vision. If you don't have a good vision, you know, do you understand your customer? Certainly ethics is really important to us as well. You know, and we're gonna go look up all that stuff.
Awesome. That makes sense. Looks like we're almost at time. So I have just one last question for you. Are there any products or tools to help software development teams work faster or smarter that you're excited about right
now? Well, I spend most of my time looking at 2 things. I would say one is cloud, just because everything is going to the cloud as fast as you can. I think that if you think of it like the Titanic iceberg, only 10% of compute is currently in cloud, which means 90% of it is still up for grabs in some way. And that means that whether or not they adopt a technology that is being sold by one of the cloud service providers or a new technology that's going to be developed, I think that there's a ton of potential there. I really like mobile, obviously, with Instabug and things like that. I mean, the install base for that is every single person on the planet. So, you know, you got billions and billions of potential nodes to integrate with. The other thing that really excites me is AI and ML. And the reason for that is there's just not enough people to go around in order to figure out how to develop these technologies. And so I think you're going to start to see, or there's an opportunity for tools that make it easier for businesses that can't attract that person that just graduated with a computer science degree in machine learning. They're too competitive to get. So tools that abstract and make that simpler for sort of the average business that's adopting IT.
Awesome. That's a great perspective. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for joining us today. This was such a great conversation. I'm sure that everyone who listened learned a lot from you. So thanks again.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Any last thoughts before we jump off?
If anybody ever wants to connect, you know, my email is justen.stepka@enterprise.fun, and you know, I'd be happy to connect.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Justen.
Yeah, you're welcome. Ciao.
Okay. Bye, everybody.